All right, let's go ahead and begin with the part 3 of our Chapter 6 vocabulary terms. Chapter 6 dealing with American society in transition. And as you can see, we're beginning part 3. Hopefully we'll be able to get the rest of the vocabulary terms in this one video. Let's find out. Anyway, let's begin with number 18, the melting pot. The melting pot is a theory that the immigrants would be melted down and then reshaped into Americans. And the idea behind this, and again, once immigrants were melted down, of course this is a metaphor, we weren't really going to melt them. The basic idea of American diversity is this melting pot theory. The best analogy I can give you is baking. I'm sure you have seen someone, your mother, your grandmother, or even yourself, bake from scratch. And so you take the flour and the sugar and the eggs and the milk or whatever it is you're using, and you put those individual ingredients together in a bowl. You mix them all up, you bake them, and then what comes out, the end result is hopefully very good taste, very delicious. It's the same concept here. The raw materials by themselves are of value, but not nearly as valuable as the end result. So each immigrant, whether each immigrant's nationality, each immigrant ethnicity, religious group, those are the different individual ingredients to the cake. The butter, the sugar, the flour, the milk. Individually, they all have value, but together, it's better. So the melting pot theory is that you take the individuals from all over the world, different ethnic groups, different religious groups, different belief systems, different cultures, and you melt them down, mix them all up, and the end result is an American. All right, let's move forward. Nativist. These are Americans who were born in the United States and most significantly wanted to limit immigration. These could be the old immigrants who saw the new immigrants as being somewhat of a threat to them and their jobs and their livelihoods. It could be people who came to America prior to the old immigrants and see the new immigrants again as a threat to America for whatever reason. But nativists are those who are native-born Americans who want to limit immigration. To that effect, we go to the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. This is the first federal law that restricted immigration to the United States. And it reflected the American bias against Asians, primarily Chinese. Again, it is named the Chinese Exclusion Act, not the Asian Exclusion Act. But it reflected upon the American bias against Asians, in particular Chinese at the time. The bulk of the Chinese who came to America settled on the West Coast. And in many areas on the West Coast, in large cities like San Francisco, Los Angeles, for example, you started to see the huge numbers of Chinese immigrants. And because of their vastly different culture, they were feared, they were despised, and they were mistreated regularly. Now, the fact that the Chinese played a huge role in the building of the railroads, in particular the Transcontinental Railroad, they also played a huge role in mining in the Rocky Mountains and a number of other positions. Irregardless of that, they were not well received here in America. So the Chinese Exclusion Act attempted to restrict your immigration. I'm sorry, rephrase that. It did not attempt to. It did restrict immigration to the United States from Asia, particularly China. Now, this is not the first thing. This is not the first problem or the first attempt to solve this problem. There were others, and there will be others after them. Let's take a look at 21 real quickly. U.S. versus Wong Kim Ark. And this is in 1898. As you can see, the United States versus Wong Kim Ark, Supreme Court case, ruled that the children of Chinese immigrants who were born in the U.S. cannot be denied citizenship. Now, why is this an issue? Well, it's an issue because this is a part of the Chinese Exclusion Act. The Chinese Exclusion Act basically stated, aside from, in addition to limiting the number of Chinese coming to America, it also tried to make the point that Chinese immigrants who had children in America, those children were not U.S. citizens. So U.S. versus Wong Kim Ark, the Supreme Court sided with Wong Kim Ark and basically ruled that children born in the United States are U.S. citizens. The Chinese Exclusion Act attempted to deny citizenship to the Chinese children. This Supreme Court case shut that down. Let's move forward. Number 22, Frontier. I'm waiting for my drawing mode. It's rather slow this morning. The frontier, generally this has been defined as the line separating areas of settlement from unsettled wilderness territory. The frontier is that imaginary line separating areas from unsettled wilderness territory from settled. Civilization from areas that are essentially the wilderness. Now, this frontier line moves all the time. As civilization expands, the wilderness kind of shrinks. As wilderness moves westward, so does frontier. So the frontier that is today the frontier, what we define the frontier today, will be different in a year and was different a year ago. Pretty simple, hopefully. Whenever civilization ends and the wilderness begins, that's the frontier. Now, really today, there aren't that many frontiers left in the world. And of course, as everybody's favorite TV show says, space, the final frontier. Whether space is actually our final frontier or not, I'm not really sure. But really, that's about the next to last frontier for us to conquer. The last one, or the next last one, probably would be the oceans. And the last one would be space. But anyway, that's the frontier. We're getting off topic. Let's move forward. Number 23, Indian Wars. Now, these are a series of battles fought against the Plains Indians during the late 1800s. Okay, so after the Civil War, and when the war ended in 1865, Union troops were stationed along the frontier. Now, again, the frontier is an ever-growing, ever-moving, ever-changing, ever-evolving concept. At one time, the frontier was the Mississippi River, and was for a long time. But as we move past the Mississippi into the Great Plains, well, the frontier kind of shrinks. Okay. The Army defeated several tribes in the Great Plains in the Southwest during the late 1800s. The tribes that were defeated were forced onto reservations. And we've already, I think, discussed reservations a little bit in class, and we'll probably see a little bit more, discuss a little bit more, and watch a couple of videos if we haven't already. The Homestead Act, 1862. Now, keep in mind, excuse me, 1862 is in the middle of the Civil War. So while we are fighting the Civil War, we're still trying to grow as a nation. We're still trying to expand. So the Homestead Act of 1862 stated that any citizen who could occupy 160 acres of government land and own it if the settler, again, that goes back to any citizen, improved the land by making a home and growing crops. The homesteader would own the land after 5 years of occupation. So the Homestead Act gave land away to people, and this land, of course, would be on the Great Plains, would give 160 acres of land to a man, his family, and it would be theirs at the end of 5 years if he could show improvement, for example, building a home on it, a house on it, and growing crops on it. If that could be done and proven to be done, then those 160 acres would now become the property of the homesteader. The idea behind this was to, again, expand westward, move civilization westward, take some of our surplus population from the east, move it west, take some of our immigrants, like the Germans, who a lot of them came to America looking for land so they could farm, take a lot of that excess population, move it westward, and build up those unsettled areas west of the Mississippi, get them populated, which then would lead to the expansion of civilization. It would turn those areas into territories. Eventually, those territories would become states, and the country would be growing and improving. Was it always successful? No. Did a lot of these homesteaders lose everything, including their lives? Yes. Yeah, they did. Homesteading on the Great Plains was never easy. The Great Plains are great. It gets enough rainfall, and it's great for growing grass for cattle, horses, buffalo, but it really doesn't get enough rain to grow most crops. You then have to irrigate. So homesteading on the Great Plains was never, ever easy. All right, let's go to number 25. Western music. Its roots was in British folk ballads, and it celebrated the country lifestyle. Now, I don't have at this moment an example of that Western music. If I can find one, I'll play some. But we'll just leave it at that. Let's go to our next slide. Number 26. The American Indian. Now, you got to keep in mind that we often refer to the American Indians as the Native Americans. Well, they're not native to the Americas. They immigrated over here just as everybody else has. They just did it first. Most historians tend to agree that there was several ice bridges formed during the ice ages, anywhere between 30 to 60, 70,000 years ago. And during those ice ages, Asians crossed the land bridge into what is now Alaska and then migrated through Canada, the United States, Mexico, into South America. It was those migrations over tens of thousands of years that led to the populating of North and South America with the individuals that we mistakenly refer to as Indians. Okay, with that happy thought in mind, let's move forward. So we're looking at the American Indian. They were the first to settle the United States. They, the natives, Native Americans, at one time occupied all of the present United States, again into Mexico and South America. They were composed of many different groups and spoke hundreds of different languages. So the American Indian, the Native American, if you will, though they descended from similar stock over the course of the centuries, over the course of the thousands and thousands of years, they evolved differently. Different groups settled in different parts of the Americas, and because of the terrain, because of the climate, because of the types of animals or land, they created a separate culture. Okay, let's go to number 27. More than likely, this will be our last one. Got 3 or 4 more minutes, and that'll take us about 18, 19 minutes or so, and I think that'll be enough for the day. Number 27, factors eroding Native American control of the West. So at one time, Native Americans, because they were the only people here, controlled all of the Americas. As the Europeans came over, first the Spanish and then the English and the French, they started to lose control of the Americas, particularly North America. And now we're looking at is Native Americans losing control specifically in the West. And that would be west of the Mississippi. Forced removal, letter A. In 1830, Congress ordered that the removal of all natives to the west of the Mississippi River. In 1830, the Indian Removal Act, though its name is not mentioned here, it's in another chapter somewhere or the other, Congress ordered all of the natives that were west of the Mississippi to be rounded up at gunpoint and moved west of the Mississippi River. The Cherokees were the ones who suffered the most. Nearly 1/3 of all the Cherokees perished in their journey westward, and we refer to this as the Trail of Tears. The Cherokee, which were found on the East Coast in Georgia and the Carolinas, fought it in the courts. They won in the courts, but Andrew Jackson, who was the President of the United States at that time, just ignored the courts and continued the rounding up of the natives and forcing them westward. It is called the Trail of Tears because it is said by the natives that you could track their movements by the tears cried over the dead. Again, nearly a third, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but we're looking at hundreds, thousands of people who died. A third of all Cherokees who were involved in this westward movement died. Letter B, our second factor, which led to the American Indians losing control of the West, was a flood of settlers. Large numbers of immigrants just overwhelmed the natives. So as we continue to move westward, thanks to the Homestead Act, which we looked at in the previous slide, as more and more settlers moved in, they encroached on, more and more, encroached upon the hunting grounds of the Native Americans. As the Transcontinental Railroad pushed through in 1869, the railroad workers needed food, and so the buffalo was a great source. It was soon discovered that the buffalo hide was of some value, monetary value, and so thousands upon thousands of buffaloes were slaughtered. They were skinned. The carcasses were left to rot in the sun, and the hides were then taken back east where they were made into blankets and coats and hats and blah, blah, blah. So these things all led to a diminishing food supply because the Plains Indians depended upon the buffalo for their very existence. The Homestead Act, continuing with letter B, provided free lands to settlers, which is, of course, one of the reasons why you had such large numbers moving westward. So you have large numbers of people moving west across the Mississippi. You have the Transcontinental Railroad, excuse me, in which you needed to feed the workers, so the buffalo provided an excellent source. As the farmers moved westward, they fence in their lands. You have cattlemen moving out west. Again, keep in mind the Great Plains are great for buffalo, for cattle, for horses. And with them, the settlers and the cattlemen, they took guns. The army went with them. And there was an ongoing war for decades between the westward moving Americans and the natives who were already on the plains. So, add all this up, let's continue. Along with the continuation of the railroad growth, the native lands became more desirable. As the railroad expanded, the Transcontinental Railroad is completed, and then you have different little spurs coming off of it going to different cities. It is now easier to get from the east west. It was now easier to move people and goods from east to west, west to east. So therefore, as a farmer, I could get my crops to the market more easily, which meant more money. We can move more people eastward from the east westward, which meant more settlers. Unfortunately for the Native Americans, they were doomed from the very beginning. Letter C, warfare. The white man, if you wish to use that phrase, the Americans had just a huge technological advantage over the Native Americans, and therefore the Indian Wars were a foregone conclusion. The natives were going to lose. The American military was well trained, well equipped, and in large numbers. And because of the huge numbers, the growing numbers of the American population, there were always replacements. Native Americans, their population was dwindling. Constant warfare over decades, the dwindling supply of their food source, the dwindling numbers of the American buffalo, the shrinking of their territories, the shrinking of the lands, meant either eventual extinction of the Native Americans or life on the reservation. Our last one, destruction of the natural environment. Competition between the settlers, the miners, and the farmers led to the destruction of the natural environment in which the natives depended upon their livelihood. Pretty simple. As everybody moves westward and we discover gold in California, we discover gold and silver in the Rockies, as we discover ways to grow crops on the Great Plains, as we discover that the Great Plains grasses are fantastic for cattle, there is a rush out west to take advantage of these natural resources. And who is squeezed out? The Native Americans. So, the factors leading to the destruction of the Native American way of life, their forced removal and onto reservations, the flood of settlers moving westward for the free lands that were being given away by the government, the constant state of warfare, which lasted for decades, and then finally, the destruction of the natural environment, including their main source of food and tools and weapons, the American buffalo. Okay, we're going to go ahead and stop it this time. We're a little over 21 minutes. This has been our third video, part 3 of our Chapter 6 vocabulary terms. So we're going to stop it. We'll finish it up with the fourth one.